And good morning, Bills Mafia. That red light is on, which means this week's episode is officially live. And boy, am I excited for today because it is the final preseason game and one of the final obstacles in front of us before we kick off the regular season at MetLife Stadium. My name is Joe DeRosa. You could find me on Twitter at show_DeRosa. And today's guest is the cover one and only Greg Tompsett as we talk about the end of preseason, our final thoughts, and we're going to look at a potential final roster prediction for the Buffalo Bills. Thank you all so much for tuning into this week's episode of Under Review. Let's go.
Previous play will go under review.
And once again, everybody, thank you so much for tuning into this week's episode. As I said before, my name is Joe DeRosa, and joining me today is someone that you all know and love. He is on the cover one Mount Rushmore. His name is Greg Tompsett. Thank you so much for being here, Greg.
Morning, Joe. What's going on? It's game day.
It is game day for both the Bills and college football, which is pretty exciting.
Yeah, there's actual real football that matters today, and also a Bills game.
Very rare to say that, but yes, final preseason game. I guess we have to be a little more stressed because the starters are playing, which, give or take your opinion on that, it's happening.
Oh, we'll discuss it.
Oh, we will. Yes, absolutely. But thank you so much for being here, Greg. To all of you joining our chat today, listening to us live, watching us live, or listening after the fact, thank you so much for your time. If you could do me and Greg as well a favor, subscribe to this channel, like this video, like some of the content that we have on the network. And in the link below, or in the description below, I have a link to the Cover One Premium Pass, which I strongly suggest that if you are not a part of or not a premium member yet, you give yourself the chance to join it. There are a lot of great perks to it. And one of the best parts is the premium Slack channel, which has Bills discussion every day about every topic you can think of. But before we kick today's show off with all of our topics, Greg, I have a question for you. And that question is, do you like fantasy by any chance?
I love fantasy football, probably to an unhealthy degree.
Yes, me too. And it's funny you mentioned that because I really want to tell you about the easiest way to get some action on the NFL. It's Underdog Fantasy and their pick'em game. Just pick higher or lower on your favorite or least favorite player stats, and you can win up to 20 times your money in a single night. Underdog keeps it super simple with their easy-to-use website and mobile apps. Pick between 2 and 5 players to fill out your pick'em entry, get every pick right, and take home some cold hard cash. Use the code COVER1 and get your first deposit doubled up to $100 by Underdog. Thank you so much to Underdog Fantasy for being a partner with Cover One. Now, Greg, let us move on and commence forth as we talk about the final preseason game, or the events kind of leading up after. It's going to be really a show where we just talk about the final thoughts on this year's preseason. And before we get into that, I want to ask you something. Last night, we received some very interesting news on the Bills front, specifically the backup quarterback front. Now, you and I both are in agreement that if Josh Allen, and I'm going to knock on wood real fast, if Josh Allen goes out for any extended period of time, the Super Bowl hopes become much harder to be hopeful for. However, the Bills expressed interest in a backup quarterback. And we know this for sure, as it was reported by ESPN's Diana Rossini, where they said that the Bills were one of the suitors for Mr. Trey Lance out of San Francisco. So, Greg, I want to ask you, do you think this is indicative of a future move that the Bills will make? And if not, do you think it's also just checking in on a first-round talent?
Probably more the latter than the former. I think anytime you have a chance to pick up a former number 3, number 2 overall pick, regardless of whether he's still that value, for a day 3 pick, it's worth checking in on when you don't have an established backup quarterback. So obviously we have Matt Barkley and Kyle Allen. I think they are probably closer to the rest of the league's backup quarterback situation than many fans want to acknowledge, that Blaine Gabbert is backing up Patrick Mahomes, Trevor Siemian is backing up Joe Burrow. It's not like there's these amazing backup quarterbacks in the other franchise situations. I'll ask anyone if they watched Marcus Mariota in Atlanta last year. He's backing up Jalen Hurts now. So, don't get me wrong. Are maybe those guys 2% better than Kyle Allen? Sure. But it's not like other teams in franchise quarterback situations have a Jacoby Brissett, a Tyrod Taylor, one of the higher end backup quarterbacks. So I get why fans want to feel better. And don't get me wrong, if next year Ryan Tannehill becomes the next guy of like, hey, I guess I'm not a starter anymore, I'll go be somebody's high-end backup. Sure, I'll take that if it's cheap. I'm not interested in paying for it. I'm not interested in not having a Leonard Floyd, not having a Connor McGovern, because we wanted a slightly better backup plan. Because I'll flip this around to you, Joe. If come playoff time, Patrick Mahomes looks across the field and it's, I didn't realize they had Jacoby Brissett. Like, do you think all of a sudden he's super nervous? That's the best backup quarterback in the league. Do you think Patrick Mahomes is now super concerned?
Of course. No, I'm just kidding. He's not.
So, in the grand scheme of things, is it smart that we poked around to see if we could upgrade from Kyle Allen for really cheap? Sure. Do I think it's indicative that we're going to make a move? Probably not. And do I think the grand scheme of all these things, I just rambled for 2 full minutes. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. The roster is good enough that whoever the backup quarterback is, Kyle Allen, Matt Barkley, anybody, we can probably beat the Commanders. We can probably beat the Raiders. We can beat the Cardinals. We can beat the Texans. Guess what? If we have one of the really good backups, if it's the week that we're playing the Chiefs or the Eagles or the Bengals, it doesn't matter anyways. We're not going to beat them regardless of who the backup quarterback is. If that happens to happen during the playoffs, it's not going to matter. Like, it's just the backup quarterback matters so much less than anyone thinks. And all the examples people always go to are rosters that were ridiculously talented, and the talent between the starter and the backup was negligible. Because Jeff Hostetler wasn't all that much different than Phil Simms. And Nick Foles wasn't all that different than Carson Wentz. Those teams won because the rest of their roster was ridiculous. That's why. They weren't carried by quarterback. They were carried by talent on the roster. And then when there was a change at quarterback, it didn't really change all that much.
Right. And real fast before I get to my point, Linda, thank you so much for donating today. Really appreciate you. She watches every week. She's fantastic. She's always engages. One of my favorites for this show. But I can't pick favorites. I love everybody. I'm a golden retriever in a human's body. Anyways, Greg, what I want to follow up with is when it comes to that conversation, especially the playoff conversation, think back to the Chiefs this past year, right? So you think about Patrick Mahomes' injury he suffers against the Jaguars, goes to the sideline in blinding pain. And everyone's first thought, especially if you're a Chiefs fan, is, oh no, because this might be a loss if you're trotting Chase Daniel out there, or whoever the backup quarterback is.
It was Chad Henne.
It was Chad Henne. I apologize. I'm thinking Chase Daniel. I get him confused. But you trot him out there and you're thinking you're really asking Chad Henne to carry you for a playoff game against a very hungry Jaguars team. Crazier things have happened, but you don't like your odds. And rather than experimenting with that, Mahomes comes back out on the field on one leg. They would rather trot out Patrick Mahomes on one leg than have a backup quarterback handle a playoff game. And I do agree that it's not a bad thing to have a good backup quarterback, right? Because if that, heaven forbid, Allen goes down long term. I'm going to do it every time I say it, by the way, Greg. Heaven forbid Allen goes down long term. You want someone where there isn't a talent drop-off. And when it comes to Trey Lance, the intangibles, the talent, just talent, with his arm, his mobility, they're there, and I still believe, can be molded. However, it's not something that I think you plan for. It's not something that I think on normal circumstances you're going to try and put too much assets for. Because think about it. Brandon Beane accrues all of this draft capital, right? Do you want to give up any of that valuable draft capital when things become more expensive down the road for a backup quarterback when you don't expect a backup quarterback to play because you have Josh Allen? Unless it's cheap, unless it's worth it, I'm going to say no. That's just the bottom line.
Yeah, it's about opportunity cost. So anytime that I can get an improved situation at any position without spending any more money? Of course the answer is yes. If I can have, I don't even know who the example is. I'll use Tyrod. If I can have Tyrod Taylor instead of Kyle Allen for the same amount of money, of course I would take Tyrod Taylor. He's better. I would be happier with our situation. The question is, would you rather have Tyrod Taylor or would you rather have Kyle Allen and Leonard Floyd?
Right. And
would
I
you
would
rather have
too.
Kyle Allen or, and Connor McGovern? Would you rather have Kyle Allen and Deontay Hardy? Because we would have had to sacrifice one of those guys to get how much money San Francisco paid Sam Darnold, to get a Andy Dalton, to get a Jacoby Brissett. Those guys cost, sometimes, hell, Tyrod was getting like $10 and $12 million as a backup. Mostly right now, the high-end backup quarterback market is $6 to $9 million. We paid Leonard Floyd $9 million. I'd rather have Kyle Allen and Leonard Floyd than have, I feel better we have Jacoby Brissett. And you're right. If we go down, if Josh Allen goes down for 4 games, do I feel slightly better if we had Jacoby Brissett and maybe it would help us maintain a division lead or a number 1 seed in the playoffs or something like that? Sure, I would feel better. But ultimately, it only matters if Josh Allen comes back. And if Josh Allen comes back, it doesn't really matter where we are in the division or where we are in the seeding. If we have Josh Allen, we have a chance. So it's just, backup quarterback doesn't matter. It doesn't matter.
No, I agree completely. All valid points. If you're giving me someone that can hold it down for 2 to 4 games, sure. But long term, if Allen's down, and Roy already offered to knock on wood for me, so I'll let him do that for the rest of the episode. But Greg, I thank you for enabling my superstition. Yeah, it's a lost cause. It's a lost cause if it's long term. If it's short term, sure. But again, it has to be cheap.
And I think we even lie to ourselves about how much better Mitch Trubisky or Case Keenum actually are than Kyle, because better is a relative term. I do think they're better. I do. They are closer to Kyle Allen and Matt Barkley than they are to Josh Allen. So yes, they may incrementally be the 35th and 38th best quarterbacks instead of the 45th best quarterback, but none of them are the second best quarterback.
Yes. And my final thought on the matter is also think of when you sign, if you trade for whoever it may be as your backup quarterback who wasn't on your roster during training camp, there is also the fact that they have to learn the offense still. So yes, if you have to deal with
anything, that was actually the most interesting part to me about the Trey Lance piece, because someone asked me on Twitter, would this have meant he was the third quarterback? And my immediate instinct was, I sure as hell hope not. I don't want to give up a valuable roster spot for an extra project quarterback. So no, I would hope that it just means we would have to keep Lance as the backup on the roster, and then maybe we keep both Kyle Allen and Matt Barkley on practice squad to call them up. I'd be furious. I already have a hard enough time doing my 53-man roster projection, fitting everybody in that I want. I don't want a third quarterback, but it does bring up that question. How ready could Trey Lance have gotten in 2.5 weeks if we actually needed him in a spot?
And I am not confident in that at all. But yeah, it could have just been due diligence, checking in. Hey, we have an extra pick. Why not? But ultimately, he's a Cowboy now. He's not ours. We can hope to see what Bean does after cutdown day. But Greg, let's get to my first topic originally before the Trey Lance conversation started. And that's really just talking about our top performers during preseason. Before we get to our final roster predictions, it's worth noting some of the people that did show out, did perform well, and might have earned their keep. So I want to ask you, just give me some people you think really shined during this preseason and people you think might have a chance to make the roster that we didn't think.
So I'm going to kind of start bottom up a little bit, and I want to give a shout out to some guys who I don't think it's unfortunately going to matter for them. I was impressed with Richard Garage. I was impressed with Keyshawn Johnson. I was impressed with Cameron Klein. Those are all guys that I think did themselves well and probably went from not really having a shot at even a practice squad to now probably being a practice squad priority. I really hope we work to get Richard Garage and Cameron Klein back onto the practice, and Keyshawn Johnson as well. Maybe even Tyrell Shavers. Those are guys who they did themselves a solid by playing so well that now they're a priority to get on the practice squad, and are probably, I don't think it's likely any of them get claimed, because claimed means another team puts them on the 53-man roster. I don't know that I expect that, but you could argue that maybe another lesser team is going to offer a quicker path to the roster, and they could pick another practice squad. That happens sometimes. The next level is guys who I thought did a good job and impressed me overall. Obviously, you're talking some of our higher end draft picks. I was really pleased with Dalton Kincaid, obviously, Osiris Torrance. Those are guys I had high expectations for, and they met or even exceeded my expectations a little bit. I was pleased with the early parts of camp with Terrell Bernard. I wish we could have got a chance to see more, but I was happy with him. Taylor Rapp is another guy I had reasonably high expectations for, and he has done even better than them. But the middle ground is actually the most important, because out of all the guys I talked about, none of their life is really going to change all that much. Those guys were already going to be on a roster and now just maybe solidified a starting spot. Other guys weren't really going to be on a roster, and now maybe they get to be on a practice squad. But the ones who actually changed their lives are, you weren't on a roster coming in, and now I think you are. And that is always the most impressive to me. So number one on that list for me is Ryan Vandemark. He is, I won't lie, I'm pretty good with all 90 guys on the roster coming into camp. And normally, when we were at camp, I could rattle off almost everybody. Some of the lower receivers I didn't know by number. I would have to look up like, oh, wait, is Marcel Aitman 15? Or who is, because I knew that Keyshawn Johnson and Terrell Shavers and Marcel Aitman were the receivers, but I didn't have their numbers memorized, some of those weird things. I think I knew Ryan Vandemark was on the roster coming into camp. I'm not 100%. I could have called it out or said, oh, hey, that's Ryan Vandemark. He's looked great. No, I want to actually take that back. He's looked great at left tackle, and he's looked not great at right tackle, which for an undrafted free agent who is just getting started, that's not crazy. Like, that makes sense that there's a little bit of give and take. He's not a experienced, well-versed right and left tackle at the same time. So that's going to be one of my things to watch for today is Ryan Vandemark at right tackle. Does he show any more improvement there, or should we just consider him? He's not a swing tackle. He's our backup left tackle, which right now in my mind he is. Right now in my mind he is only our backup left tackle. He looked markedly worse on the right side, to the point where I would actually rather play David Questenberry. Go ahead. Let's talk about him, then I'll do my other one.
I was just going to say, go figure, real quick. Go figure he's worse at right tackle than left tackle. You know what I mean? Just considering the climate at that position right now, you would hope that he would step up there.
It would have been lovely if his natural, and that's to his credit, that's not like him being bad. All he's played is left tackle. He played left tackle in high school and college. Like, he played left tackle. Like, that's what he does. So it's not his fault that he's not also good at right tackle. That's just, he's had to worry about being good enough at any position to make an NFL roster. And for him, that's left tackle, and God bless him. That's a valuable one. Good job. The other name is one that, I obviously tried to kind of tamper down expectations early on, because people got way ahead of themselves in the line, as has been foretold. Bills Mafia always falls in love with insert name here. Derrick Rogers, Christian Wade, Brandon Riley, David Sills, Nick Easley, whoever the training, Duke Williams, the training camp darling du jour. We always go way overboard, and it almost never works out. Every once in a while, we get a guy who actually sticks. Stevie Johnson is a famous one that actually worked out and was real. Andy Isabella was a little bit different, because he wasn't like an undrafted free agent out of nowhere. He actually was a second-round pick that ran a 4.31. Some people had him at a 4.29. Is crazy fast. I get the excitement. I think it's helped manage it a little bit that we've realized he's probably not, a lot of fans had to come to the realization he's not insert every other white slot receiver ever of people, oh, he's the next Wes Welker, he's the next Julian Edelman, he's Cole Beasley, but faster. No, he's not. He's not nearly the route runner those guys are. But I will say his usage, the route running they do ask him to do, which in option routes in space is pretty decent. And then the biggest thing for me was he actually looked pretty decent in special teams coverage, like going down, covering punts, covering kicks. I think he's put himself right there in real discussion for a roster spot. I don't know for sure that he's going to make it, but he is, I think, at worst, like my 54th, 55th guy, and he's got a real shot to make this roster. And honestly, pretty heavily dependent on the rib cage of one Khalil Shakir.
Yeah. So when we get to the roster prediction, I'll go more in depth on that last point. But I agree with, like, there were plenty of good performers, and every preseason is going to show you somebody against later stringers playing really well. And it makes you kind of happy with their performance, optimistic for a roster spot. But obviously the regular season is a totally different beast. It's just like night and day. And that's why you see so many guys that perform really well in the preseason, i.e. Nathan Peterman, and kind of fall flat on their face when the actual dynamics of different defenses and different pressures start kicking in, especially against really talented players. But it is worth noting some of the good performances. And I'm glad you brought up Really, really glad you brought up Isabella. I knew we were going to get to it at some point, but yeah, he deserves the nod. He's played really well in the time he's been given. You're seeing him getting reps with the ones, which I think bodes well for his chances for a roster spot, which we will get to. But I want to bring up somebody outside of who you named that I do think deserves some love. You could call it a pick that was faced with some sort of scrutiny just because of where he was picked and kind of the talent level you were expecting out of him for the need on your defense. But I want to shout out Dorian Williams. I think Dorian Williams deserves some love from this preseason. He has come in late games. He's obviously, at this point in time, going to be your depth for Matt Milano. And while, yes, you're probably not going to see him on the field too much, again, knock on wood for me, Roy, because it's Matt Milano's job and you don't want to remove an all-pro from that position. Dorian Williams, in every opportunity he's gotten, not every opportunity, but in a lot of his shots in the preseason, has looked very good. And it seems like some of those woes that we had about him when he was coming out of college, aka can he shed blocks in the professional level? Is he physical enough? Like all of these things, they don't look like concerns anymore. Like when he plays with confidence. He plays with a motor. He's getting by people. He's blowing up runs at the line of scrimmage. He's as fast as anyone on that field. He has looked good. Now, again, I talk about the second and third stringers. Yeah. That obviously matters. But I'm also looking from Dorian Williams, who I know Babich has talked about trying to reshape his mental capacity at the linebacker position. I'm looking for just signs. I'm looking for sparks from him. I've seen plenty from him. Do you agree?
Yes, but I want to make sure fans understand why. So he has shown a lot of legitimate sparks, flash, whatever you want to call it, that are real. They're real at outside linebacker. And I'm going to use another example. In Baltimore, Patrick Queen was a bust. Patrick Queen looked terrible because he couldn't handle all the responsibilities of getting everyone into the position they're in, calling the communication, doing all of the deciphering of the opposing offense, and then reading that, reacting, and making a play. And he was just a step slow on everything. All of a sudden, they bring in Roquan Smith, and they move Patrick Queen over to outside linebacker, where he can just read and react, or you hear people talk about see ball, get ball. All of a sudden, he's flourishing and looks great. Well, guess why? Because they took like 80% of the stuff off his plate. So yes, Dorian Williams, when you take 80% of the stuff off his plate, can see ball, get ball, and can read and react and just go and do awesome stuff. When they tried to put him in a middle linebacker, all of a sudden, he was a step slow and he was missing everything in coverage and he wasn't there. So when people get mad, so what happens is people only watch the part you talked about. And they say, well, I saw him flash. Look, I saw him come downhill and make an awesome tackle in the backfield. I saw him shoot a gap and be able to get into the backfield and make a big play. Why aren't they playing him at middle linebacker? And it's because it's not the same thing.
No, not at all.
The same thing. And so I just, it's important to temper that, because people will try to connect that dot and say, yeah, but it can't be worse than what those guys are doing. It can always be worse. It can always be worse.
It can. And I want to stress, like, I'm seeing the flashes, but I don't think you plug Dorian Williams at middle linebacker. What I do think, though, is eventually, because again, it's a project. They're working on him. They're giving him time. But eventually, he might earn his keep to get reps at middle linebacker.
100%.
Just not yet. Not yet. But I will acknowledge that I'm seeing physical tools from him and this motor from him that makes me excited for his future, optimistic that he could earn that eventually and be someone that you could consider. But again, we don't know what Terrell Bernard actually looks like in a starting role in a regular season game yet fully, like knowing it's his job. We don't know what he's going to be. So there's also this idea that, you know, we're done. We're toast at middle linebacker. We do have some reasons to be concerned, absolutely, but we don't know what it looks like yet. That's just the bottom line. Tyrel Dodson, you can make the point that, yes, he looked bad in limited time, but I do think there's still me, and this is my optimistic take, Greg, so feel free to shoot me down here if you'd like, but I want to see what Terrell Bernard looks like before I hit the panic switch on middle linebacker this season. What do you think?
Coming into camp, I think I want to go back and find the clip. My exact phrasing was, I kind of hope Dorian Williams plays so well that they have to give him a shot. But by far the betting favorite is Terrell Bernard. All of his positives coming in were his intelligence, his instincts, his ability to read and respond and decipher. He's going to be the betting favorite. And I bet Terrell Dodson gets the first snap there, because that's what we always do. He's the guy who came in for Edmonds last year, so I guess they'll give him the first snaps there. But the betting favorite should be Terrell Bernard. Well, guess what? Terrell Bernard got the most first-team snaps, tied with Dodson. He and Dodson were rotating. He was getting the most first-team snaps of anyone. He looked the best. He looked by far the best in coverage. And then he hurt his hamstring. And then the other guys all played like microwave garbage. So, all of a sudden, the guy who was the betting favorite anyways, now, the moment he's healthy enough to play, he's going to be the starter. Because he was probably going to be the starter anyways. We are just so obsessed with recency bias and what have I seen lately. And yeah, but I didn't see him in 2 preseason games. Well, guess what? Bobby Babbitt has seen him in about 1,000 practice reps. That's the thing that matters, not how much we have seen him. And I say we and point at myself. I did see him. I did watch with my own eyes and watch Terrell Bernard be the best linebacker that I watched in space, in coverage, understanding where he was supposed to be. So now it might have shifted where instead of Terrell Dodson holding it down until Bernard is healthy, maybe now it's AJ Klein who holds it down until he's healthy. But also the last 2 or 3 days, we've seen Terrell Bernard in uniform going through drills, walking through with the team, and he's got more than 2 weeks until the game. Right now, if you ask me to place a bet, I would bet my money that the starting middle linebacker against the Jets on Monday night is Terrell Bernard. That would be my bet.
Yeah, I agree. And if anyone watched my linebacker episode a few weeks ago, I want you to know I said, and I'll own up to this, I said going into camp that I thought Dodson was the one. I thought just because of the veteran factor. The fact that he had been there, the fact that he had been behind Edmonds, the fact that he knew the playbook, even with the adjustments, not whatever it may be with McDermott. I figured they just wanted to go with someone that had played, that know that Bernard played, but I think Dodson just being behind Edmonds mattered more. But again, I opened myself to say he was had room to be dethroned, and I think that Dodson might have gotten dethroned. I really do. I mean, not just in practice, but you watch some of his snaps in preseason. And again, I'm one of those people who will tell you, don't put too much stock in preseason. Take things away from it, absolutely, but don't think the sky is falling because you lost a game. But there are just some plays you see from him and you're kind of like, I don't know. And I would worry about that going up against a team that's likely going to attack the middle of the field with Rodgers and Garrett Wilson. So I'm kind of this mindset that now I'm just willing to roll the dice. I know we haven't seen much of Bernard, but yes, like you said, Greg, they've seen him in practice. He's not getting 1 reps for no reason. They're not doing it because he stumbled into it and they needed someone. They're doing it because he earned it. Because again, there's still Balin Spector. Balin Spector's out of this competition, which means that they had valid reason to believe that he's not someone that they want to run with the ones, even though he had a good practice. So
also, that also fits in for the people who get mad about why aren't they giving Dorian Williams more chances at middle linebacker? They gave a 7th round pick first team snaps at middle linebacker. Believe me, if Dorian Williams had earned those reps, he would have gotten them. There's a reason they haven't. They literally gave a 7th round pick a chance at it because he had earned the reps.
Please say that louder for the people in the back, because it bothers the crap out of me too. And we'll get more to that because we have another position battle that pretty much has this conversation shrouded like a dark cloud. But real fast, and I agree with everything you said, Greg. I think it's Bernard's now to lose. Bernard healthy is the one that I think they're going to run out there at MetLife, and I'm very excited to watch him. I know that there's concerns, but I guess if I can quell people's concerns to any degree before he plays and either enhances our optimism or makes us even more worried, is that he's been here for a year, right? Yes, he didn't play all that much last season, but he's been with McDermott. He's been with these coaches. He's been around these players. And now you have him all of a sudden getting up to the ones and showing enough in camp that he's deserving of this job. So if you want to take anything away from that, be encouraged by the fact that Terrell Bernard's earning his keep and might even earn his keep long-term in this defense, because I'll tell you, if Bernard's your starter and he's doing well, I can't even begin to tell you what that's going to do for the defense as a whole and what positive that will bring. But I want to ask you one thing, Greg. Do you have any final point on this?
No. Well, my one final point is just because we have to start a player at middle linebacker doesn't mean we have a starting caliber middle linebacker. We are going to play, so as Patrick says here, we are going to play the best man for the job. It doesn't mean our best man is actually all that good.
Mm-hmm.
You know, as of right now, I don't feel like we have a player that would start on very many other teams at middle linebacker. Now, we have 10 other pretty good defenders around him, and I think we can, work with that. We also have, now we can actually play 3 safeties because we have the safety depth to bring in Taylor Rapp and to run dime defense more often, maybe 10, 15, 20% of the time even. But I don't know that any of the answers here are going to be all that good. So we'll go through. So to RJ's point here, I can't possibly express how little preseason games matter. Us seeing them doesn't matter. He did play and was by far the best player in the red and blue scrimmage in game settings with fans in the stands, with defenses being called normal. That's just as much of a game setting, and he was the best linebacker there in that setting. Us getting to see him is not a real thing, and Bobby Babich doesn't care how much we get to see.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, I'm glad you're bringing up the preseason matter too, because it was just so, and I get having negative discourse after a bad preseason game. Like, you don't want to get your butt whooped by another team's starters. But again, like, just so much is stripped from those games. I mean, the play calling is vanilla. The team had 10 men on the field on offense and still completed a pass. It's so not, like, yes, there's factors you could take, but I don't believe it matters that much either. And I don't believe that it really matters if your starters play or not. Some people believe that they do. I don't feel that. And they're playing today. And I'm kind of like of this mindset. And Aaron tweeted this morning about how much he hates the fact that starters are playing. But you have 2 weeks till the season starts. 2 weeks of practice, 2 weeks to run some of the things you're actually going to show teams in the regular season versus a preseason game where your starters are playing like a quarter and a half, maybe not even that much today, where they're not really showing you anything they want to reveal to other teams on tape. So really, I ask you, Greg, and we'll move on, like, just give me your thoughts on playing starters in the preseason today or just in general.
I get there's some pieces to it where I get why teams are doing more of the joint practices. You also saw a bunch of the fights and crazy stuff, so I get why that's kind of a mixed bag, which I don't get why players are so capable of not fist fighting in a game, but all of a sudden in a joint practice you have to get into fights and show how tough you are. Like, why are you able to control yourself in every other game setting? Mike Tomlin talked about, I don't think you can box without sparring. And that's fair. I think having some real reps, I like when the team does their team scrimmage. I wouldn't mind doing more joint practices. The preseason, it's probably disingenuous to say it doesn't matter, but what it matters for is the practice squad guys who don't get first team reps even in the scrimmage or in practice. And now all of a sudden you're seeing them in scenarios you maybe don't get to see along there. And I don't think Roy is completely wrong. And I don't know if punishment is the right. So for anyone listening, Roy here is saying playing the starters might be punishment for McDermott because of last week. I don't know if I would frame it as punishment as much as we all want to see, and he wants them to see themselves play well from a confidence standpoint going into the season. And he probably wants to prove a point of, hey, can you show me you can go out there and not have 12 penalties in the first half and show that we can be a disciplined team? So I don't think punishment is a crazy term, but it's not exactly what I would frame it as. More so, I want to see us execute at a successful level going in to the regular season. So ideally, we win the coin toss, we take the ball, we drive down and score a touchdown, and then no one who matters ever plays again the rest of the game. And the same thing, I hope we go in and literally, I hope it's a 3 and out and our starters play 3 snaps on defense and then they sit down 2 and then we're good. And now all of a sudden it is 11 minutes left in the first quarter and all of our guys are done. that would make me so happy. But I don't think Roy's wrong. I don't think punishment is crazy, but I actually think it's more like, hey, we're better than that. Let's not have the last taste in our mouth being like us looking like complete crap, which they did against the Steelers. They looked like crap. That was a horrible experience having to watch that. I don't know if it's like, oh, because you played bad, I'm going to make you play here in this other preseason game. I think it's more so, hey, let's see ourselves go out there and do this and execute at a high level so we feel better about what we have going into the Jets game. That's probably just positive spin in my mind, but that's more of the way that I think of it.
Little did we know that 12P actually stood for 12 penalties. But yes, I agree. It's
and Steven here again, we are not alone. Aaron Rodgers is playing this week. Patrick Mahomes is playing this week. All of Pittsburgh, Kansas City, Cleveland, most teams are also playing their starters. So this is not some rogue thing that's just a McDermott thing. And traditionally, the third week of the preseason was the week that you always played your starters, like the first half, and even like playing into the first drive of the second half. So this is very normal. It's just things are a little different now that we eliminated one of the preseason games.
Yeah, and think about last year, too, when they played Denver, had a great drive, got off the field, and then they didn't play again. And then the year prior, they played Green Bay, and then they got off the field and didn't play again after scoring. And here we are, and they had an awful performance in preseason, and they're actually playing again. So I'm fully on board with the idea that McDermott's just sick of what he saw. And when you're not only playing a game against a road game, but a divisional road game where that actually matters a ton if you're talking about playoff seeding down the road, then I think they want to be as prepared as possible, especially with the unforeseen threat of the new look Jets. So makes sense, but doesn't mean I have to like it. I just understand it for sure. And I think a lot of people like you, Greg, or people that do see the side of just let these guys play, do see it for that as well. Now, I'm going to ask you a very quick question and we'll go on to the CB2 battle, but something that we have to think about when we do the roster construction. And by the way, Spin, I see your comments. We will discuss our 53 projection. I will answer those questions as well. But really, do you think that Von Miller plays week 1 or do you think it's better to shelf him for 4 weeks?
I would have a heated debate with anyone who thinks there's any benefit to him playing week 1. Whether he's ready or not, I don't think there's any discussion that he will be better prepared by having 4 to 5 weeks more rest and ramping up. All that matters is, in case you haven't looked at our schedule, most of the tough games are in the second half of the year. Plus, for anyone who hasn't checked out lately, the NFL plays their playoffs at the end of the year. So that's an interesting dynamic that, some people might think the playoff games are before the season. They actually play the playoffs after the regular season is done. I am much more interested in Von Miller playing in those tougher games in the second half, those division games in the second half of the year, and in the NFL playoffs. So I think it makes a ton of sense. We also have a ridiculous stacked roster with, I can fit 10 defensive linemen on the 53-man roster without Von Miller. So rest him for 4 weeks. Week 5 is the London game for anyone who hasn't done international travel or 8-hour flights with any kind of injury. Inflammation and swelling can be very serious. So you don't have him do the international flight. You come back and you get the Sunday night football game against Daboll and the Giants. You make it a big deal on Sunday night football and you bring him back then. He still gets 12 games to get ready. It's actually really nice because he gets a stretch of 6 games and then a bye week and then 6 more games and then into the playoffs. So it's a really nice setup. I think it works perfectly. I'll actually honestly be pretty genuinely surprised if that's not exactly what we see with him debuting week 6. But, he's looked good. I understand all the other pieces, but I will be shocked if they pass him on a physical and make him have to make the roster. It's so easy to not have to put him anywhere and just let him stay on physically unable to perform, bring him back after the international trip, and play him out week 6.
Firmly agree. I don't think he's playing week 1. I don't want him to play week 1. I just figured it was
I'd
worth
love to
mentioning.
I'd love to hear anyone that has thoughts on what would benefit it. I can't see any.
Well, also remember, too, Von Miller, we're not talking about a 24-year-old college prospect that's coming off an ACL tear. We're talking about someone who's towards the back end of his 30s and has a long tenured NFL career. He is a physical freak. That's why he's one of the best linebackers, defensive ends in football, and one of the best pass rushers of all time. And even though his tear was a slight tear, I don't want to rush back an older Von Miller when you think you need him for that very tough stretch. Because I looked at the schedule this morning, Greg. It's not even just tough. It's brutal. Assuming that everyone on paper is playing to similar or better strengths than they did last season, you're talking about back-to-back games where you see the Eagles and the Chiefs. And yes, there's a bye week in between, but it's still insurmountably difficult. So I would much rather shelf Vaughn, let him come back when he's fully healthy, and just enhance what's already probably going to be a very effective D-line to boot.
Yeah, that final stretch is so at the beginning, it's actually not that bad. So the Jets, I think, are a good team, but Raiders, Commanders, Dolphins are good. Jaguars, Giants, Patriots, Buccaneers. Okay, that's very doable. Then all of a sudden we go Bengals, Broncos, Jets, Eagles, Chiefs, Cowboys, Chargers, all in a row. I want Von Miller for that stretch.
Yes,
that's the stretch I care about. I care
100%.
about Joe Burrow, Russell Wilson, Aaron Rodgers, Jalen Hurts, Patrick Mahomes, Dak Prescott, Justin Herbert. I care about those 7 names and him playing against those 7 guys.
Absolutely. And again, enhancing your D-line when you're talking about uncertainty at middle linebacker, never a bad idea to get a healthy Von Miller in for that stretch. So, Greg, final topic I want to talk to you about before we move on to the actual prediction for the roster, because this is absolutely relevant to it. The winner of the CB2 battle. So first, I'm just going to ask you, at this very moment, obviously we still have a game to play, who is the front runner? And then I want to hear just, whether it's in the mix, your overall outlook on Kaiir Elam, because we did talk about before the outlook on McDermott treating him and how he's actually faring in practice. So let me hear your take on that.
So I have been as adamant as anyone about the importance of a player like Kaiir Elam and what it allows the defense to do. The problem is, all of my discussions and most of the fan base has been based on what we want Kyer Elam to be and what we think Kyer Elam can be or should be. The problem is he hasn't. He can't stop using his hands to grab. They literally had to make him wear boxing gloves in practice. That is because he doesn't have his feet in the right position. If your feet aren't in the right position, you feel like you have to grab because you're about to get beat. If that keeps happening, his, 6'1" frame with long arms and running a 4.3 940, none of that'll matter. It doesn't matter. You have to be able to be in position. So until we see that, it's all theoretical. So, of course, the idea of what we want Kyer Elam to be is better than Dane Jackson. Kyer Elam has not been better than Dane Jackson. Dane Jackson has been significantly better than the actual Kyer Elam. So until that happens, none of that actually matters. Dane Jackson is going to be the starting cornerback. It's not even a debate. Like there's no discussion. He is the starting cornerback. There is no other possibility right now. And I'll even give him, I've been as concerned as anyone about Dane Jackson. What has always been the biggest concern is that he's in position, but he doesn't make a play on the ball. Well, guess what he's done this whole preseason? He's made a lot of plays on the ball.
Yes.
Like he's made a ton of plays on the ball. So maybe while we're so focused on needing to replace him and talking about how the other guys are, would improve because they've had a chance to improve, maybe sneakily Dane Jackson has improved. Maybe he's improved and we just haven't wanted to admit it. So we'll see where it goes, but I can guarantee you when we line up week 1 against the Jets, Dane Jackson is going to be the starting cornerback.
Yes, and I think the discourse around Kyer Elam should be different than a discourse around someone that you're expecting to be a cornerback 1. We have long searched for depth at cornerback 2. Now we have depth at cornerback 2. But when we took Kyer Elam, we were taking a corner that while he did have some experience, it's something that McDermott will want to run. He is more of a physical corner. And I think the problem is there's a transition period for a player like him in this defense that needs to be addressed, and we're seeing it firsthand. And I think the problem is when people talk about Kyer Elam, they are talking about it being a failure if he doesn't start this year, or it being a kind of I guess you can call it a blemish on the organization and drafting. And yes, there's criticism there. Maybe it wasn't the best idea to take someone you were going to have to long-term develop, but we also don't know if he's really reached that ceiling yet, and I don't think he has. So when people talk about McDermott and talk about why are we not giving Kyer Elam chances, Kyer Elam isn't giving himself chances because Kyer Elam is not getting it right in practice, and he has admitted to that. And it's not me, trying to slander Kyer Elam. I think he has all the talent in the world. I see his potential in this defense, especially when you're talking about some of the receivers that the Bills defense will face this year and the longing for a physical style corner who can play it. But McDermott values what you show him in practice and needs to see you game ready. I think people want this kind of scenario where Elam gets trotted out on the field anyways, right? They want him to go out there. They want him to play. They want him to get reps in real games because they feel like that's the most valuable way. Is there value in that? Absolutely. It's the NFL. You need to play. But you also need to prove that you're worthy of taking a spot on a starting roster on game day. And if you aren't showing that in practice, if you are not giving McDermott, Bean any indication that that is the case, then I'm sorry, you're not going to play, at least as a starter. Now, can Kyer Elam still do it? Absolutely, he can. He could still figure it out. He could still get his bearings, read the defense, be more clean when he plays, and we could see him out there eventually because I think they want Kyer Elam to take that role eventually. Dane Jackson's on a 1-year deal. Christian Benford's very good, but you would rather have your first-round pick be the starter over your later-round pick, even though the value is insane if you're getting a starter in the late rounds. I think Elam can still do it. I'm not out on Kyer Elam or anything, but he's got to earn it, and I don't think he has, and I think McDermott sees that as well. Any final thoughts, Greg, before we move on to the actual crux of this episode?
No, I do think, well, one quick one. There's been some good discussion in the chat here, and I think that you can both be disappointed with Kyer Elam so far and also not determine that he's a bust who's never going to play. I am disappointed. We should be disappointed. A first-round pick with his traits should have been able to beat out those other guys. He hasn't because of their level of play. There are lots of teams where Kyrie Elam simply would be playing anyways because they didn't have anyone any better. You can't use his potential of what you want him to be able to do, especially when you're not seeing it in practice, as a reason to bench guys who are purely outplaying him, because the rest of the locker room sees those guys outplaying him every day. That's what the Cardinals are going to do this year. That's what the Texans are going to do. That was fine to do during the drought, because you want to know what? Our team was so bad, we needed to have every single draft pick pan out to give us any chance. When that's not the case, you have to play the best guy. Someone up here in the chat, I want to give them credit, talked about RC here. Talked about when Kyle Williams was drafted. He was a 5th-round pick, and they took a defensive tackle in the 2nd round that year. Imagine if we didn't play Kyle Williams and we told ourselves, well, the 2nd-round pick defensive tackle has to play. We have to give him an opportunity to improve with game snaps, and instead didn't play Kyle Williams. You have to play the best guy. Dane Jackson is the best guy, period.
Firmly agree. I can't say it any better than that. Dane Jackson's the most ready right now, and we should rock with him, because I think a contending team has the luxury of waiting for someone to develop too, like you alluded to before. And also, I'm going to be real with you, Greg, and this might break the rules of value and everything, but if Kyrie Elam for the rest of his Bills career is just serviceable enough to be depth when we need him and help the defense as a whole be better, if that means subbing him in situations where you need his skill set, I'm not really mad, because he's also a cornerback too. And I think that's really where like my kind of idea of it is we already have the cornerback one. We do need someone to inherit that eventually, because Trey will only get older. His play will eventually decline. But if you tell me that there are two better corners on the roster right now, and Kyrie Elam eventually plays well enough where he's not so much a starter, but he has a role on the team, he's playing well, and you can get something out of him, then I'm fine with it. I really am, because ultimately what matters to me at the end of the day is that the defense is sound, that the players are making plays, that we have nothing to worry about. And I would rather that than trot out Kyrie Elam, have him make mistakes on the fly, and ultimately hurt everything that we're building as a whole. But again, I think he still has a chance. But yes, I think it's fair to say, be disappointed if you want to be disappointed, but don't think that this is the end of the road for Kyrie Elam. There's a lot of time left before we can make that decision.
Yeah. Another great one here. Charles, imagine if we had kept playing Ramon Humber instead of Matt Milano. The best guy played.
Yeah. And Ramon Humber had a cool face mask. I'll give him that. But Matt Milano was the better player. I will say this. Ramon Humber, the number combo and the face mask is still something I absolutely love. So shout out to him. At least I remember him for that.
Amazing.
Was pretty cool. All right, Greg. So now we're going to get into the final topic of this episode, and the most important one, crafting the 53-man roster. So we are going to read off basically just a note that I made in the back end for today's show, really just my outlook on the roster as a whole. And Greg, just tell me, I guess, what you agree with, what you disagree with, and be honest. I want to be roasted. I need to be refined here. So I'm very, very curious what the guru has to say.
There are very few things in life that I relish more than telling other people when they're wrong. So this is really great.
Oh, beautiful. All right. Well, we're going to start with quarterback, and I think this is pretty easy, but maybe not. Josh Allen and Kyle Allen only, 1 and 2. I don't think Matt Barkley starts the year, and I don't think they're going to carry 3. What do you think?
Spot on. No notes. I will be shocked. I guess I'm not 100% that there is a chance that the backup quarterback is not currently on the roster. I think it's very, very likely that it's Kyle Allen and Matt Barkley on the practice squad.
I got you. Yeah. So we can end the show now, guys. He said spot on. I don't need to go any further into this. I'm gonna cut clips after the show is over, and after every one I say, it's just gonna see Greg saying spot on over and over again. I'm just kidding. All right, moving on to running back. James Cook, Damian Harris, and Latavius Murray. Those 3. What do you think?
Again, I just don't think there's a lot of mystery here. I think that's right. I do think I think there's an interesting competition for the fourth running back, but the fourth running back will be on the practice squad. So I don't know if I can tell you exactly. I'm kind of curious to see what we see from Ty Johnson today. But I've seen flashes from both Jordan Mims and Darrington Evans, and I don't know that we keep multiple practice squad running backs. So I am curious there. I think there's an interesting competition, but the competition is for running back 4, which will be on the practice squad.
Yeah, it feels like an open competition to just find someone that will be there, essentially break glass in case of emergency. Yeah. We need a body back. But
and I'll say Ty Johnson has a technically non-zero chance because I don't think the kick return job is completely locked up. I think Deontay Hardy is 100% our punt returner. I don't think the kick return job is 100% locked up, so maybe there's a non-zero chance Ty Johnson sneaks on as a fourth. I guess technically Darrington Evans too. That technically a fourth running back, if they cover kicks, cover punts, and return kicks, it's theoretically possible they could be on the roster. And I guess there's the chance that Damian Harris could be the short-term IR thing if his knee is still acting up. I guess that's theoretically possible, but I don't expect that. We'll see where it goes.
Right. And I mean, my original prediction was they were going to carry 4 with Hines being just purely return duty with occasional looks. So it wouldn't be outlandish for me if they wanted to go with the 4th and just have him be that sole kick returner. But yeah, I think that the difference was Hines was very good at it. I don't know what you're going to get out of these guys in the regular season. Hardy's been an all-pro before. If they want to give him maybe some nods there, they could. But really, I think just if I'm going with my gut, it's the 3 backs, Cook, Harris, and Murray. Now we get to a little bit more of a fun part. So, Greg, you've seen my sheet. I will explain this decision, but right now for day 1 of this season, week 1, Stephon Diggs, surprising, Gabe Davis, Trent Sherfield, Deontay Hardy, Andy Isabella, and Justin Shorter. And the reason I have Andy Isabella and not a Mr. Khalil Shakir is I think Shakir's going to the IR. I think the rib injury's serious enough where he's going to have to be out a few weeks. And I think Isabella's earned his keep enough to get this at least temp spot on this roster with room to be removed if he doesn't show out, or room for another player to get axed if he's doing fine and they want Shakir back. What do you think?
I'm really, really disappointed. I wanted to yell at you, but I agree.
I did not just choose Isabella over Shakir. I'm not nuts. Come on now.
I will even take it further. There's going to be a 24-hour period between Tuesday at 4 p.m. and Wednesday at 4 p.m. where Bills fans lose their mind because Andy Isabella is going to be released for 24 hours because he has no dead cap and also is a vested veteran. So they can tell him, hey, just hang out in the parking lot here for 24 hours. We'll re-sign you tomorrow and give you a $25,000 bonus for coming back. I believe that they do exactly what you said, that they keep those 6 with Shakir as part of the 6. Then they put Shakir on short-term IR because of the rib injury, and then they re-sign into Andy Isabella to be that backup slot receiver and maybe kick returner and special teams coverage guy. So I do actually think that Andy Isabella makes the roster as literally the 54th guy who gets brought back after they put Khalil Shakir on IR.
Yeah, and if Shakir didn't have this rib injury, there was the only other option for me was maybe trade candidate, maybe. But I think right now, like what you said is what's going to happen.
By far the most common, and don't get me wrong, we have seen some weird trades in the past with Russell Bodine and with, dang it, there was another veteran, older lineman. We have Marshall Newhouse. There's been some who have just been like, holy crap, I can't believe he got something for him. AJ McCarron. Most of them have been end of rookie deal guys that still have value because they wouldn't get through waivers, and a team who's lower in the waiver order who wouldn't get them trade for them because they wouldn't be able to claim them. And that's where you normally see the Daryl Johnsons and the, Cody Fords and guys like that. So I do think that Khalil Shakir and Boogie Basham are the kind of guys who in theory could be traded, although I don't necessarily think it'll be there. And RC here is spot on. There is a very special situation where Brandon Beane has realized it and Reed Ferguson have realized it. He is like the perfect loophole. We don't have any competition for long snapper. So he has no threat or concern. No team brings in other long snappers at the last minute to change all the reps that they've done with their kicker and punter and holder. Then all of a sudden you have no dead cap and he's a vested veteran. Reed Ferguson can get released with zero actual threat and then just re-sign the next day as just a roster shenanigans loophole, and we can do it every single year and nothing bad happens, and they give him like 25 grand to be like, hey, thanks for helping the team out, and he comes back and we'll do it again the year after because it's a free space on the bingo board. It happens that Andy Isabella is also in that financial situation, but in theory teams could want to bring in another wide receiver. No team wants to change up their long snapper at the last minute. It is a zero risk, easy space to move around, and Reed, fortunately, is also an awesome teammate and a great guy who loves to help the team out.
Sees the bigger picture, although Aiden does present this. What if a division rival is willing to overpay a long snapper just to screw over an opponent?
God bless him. God, you want to know what? I would almost respect it just purely for the pettiness and spite.
Yeah, that would be hilarious. But yeah, anytime you talk about the parking lot situation, I just imagine like Saul Goodman coming out of Orchard Park, like walking over to a player that's standing by his car with like one of those like burner phones. He hands them and he's like, call us back tomorrow. You'll be back in the building soon. But
yeah, Andre Roberts was that guy a couple times. Reed Ferguson's been that guy. We've done it multiple times over the last couple of years.
For sure. So now moving on to tight end. I think this one might be pretty spot on, but I'm not going to toot my horn to Greg. Again, feel free to roast. Dawson Knox, Dalton Kincaid, Reggie Gilliam, and Quentin Morris does make the roster. Morris makes it. What do you think?
First off, the most impressive thing you've done the past hour and 1 minute and 40 seconds is you listed Reggie Gilliam at tight end. It makes me so proud. That's the right answer. Those are the four guys. I don't even think there's any real mystery about it. We're going to run more 12 personnel. So, of course, we're going to keep, a fourth tight end. A lot of people are like, oh, well, we need Jay Sternberger. And I always say, no, Reggie Gilliam is our fourth tight end. Reggie Gilliam played more snaps at tight end last year than he played at fullback. He happens to be a guy who can play fullback and play tight end. He is not only one thing or the other. Also, Reggie Gilliam and Quentin Morris played the fourth and fifth most special team snaps last year. I do think Jay Sternberger could have been listed in my Keyshawn Johnson and my Richard Garage comments earlier. I do think he played himself into a practice squad priority to be kept there. I don't think he did enough to make it on the roster, and that's because he's a lesser version of Dalton Kincaid. He doesn't do any of the... If Dalton Kincaid needed to play special teams and block to make this roster, he probably wouldn't. He's fine at those things. He's not going to play special teams, and he's a fine blocker, but he is not a NFL roster caliber level blocker, and he is not a NFL roster caliber special teams player. He's just such a gifted receiver that it doesn't matter. Jay Sternberger is a pretty good receiver and also a horrible blocker and can't play special teams. He's not a gifted receiver. He's pretty good. So Jay Sternberger is interesting, and God forbid if something happened to Dalton Kincaid. Jay Sternberger would be an interesting call-up to fill that role as the big slot receiver flex tight end, but he's not good. He has not done enough to make the roster. But I do think he's a practice squad priority, and I like him, and I hope that we hold on to him to develop. And if he can work on those other things, maybe there's a chance for something else on the line.
Yeah, I could absolutely see them shelving him, and maybe, it's a long season. You never know what happens. Gilliam had some injury. I think Quentin Morris had injury last year too. There might be an opportunity for him to come up and kind of have his role, keep that 12P going. But yeah, there's really no reason to prioritize him over any of these guys. Even when you play well in preseason, it's an uphill battle, man. These guys had established spots last year. We know what we're getting. Morris also had on and off moments this preseason, but ultimately I trust him more than I trust a newcomer in Jay Sternberger to really be that fourth TE. And yeah, Gilliam's a tight end. I mean, fullback, I'm not going to designate a specific spot on this for fullback. It's just if he's lining up as a tight end, I'm lining him up as a tight end. It doesn't make a difference because he's on the roster to me. But now this is where I feel like Greg's going to yell at me. Maybe.
Okay. I will say, you went in the right order because this is the right order to go through. It was also, I think, pretty easy. Those first 4 spots, there's not actually all that much debate. The 6th receiver thing is debatable. Here's the next 3 spots is where it gets really interesting.
Aiden, I did knock on when we talked about Kincaid, by the way, as Greg did. And like I said, Roy is my knock on wood proxy, but he said his knuckles, I think, are damaged or something like that. So I wanted to take a little slack off his plate. I got to hold my end too, you know? All right, Greg, here we go. I'm really excited to get my first ever live Greg Tompsett roast. So let me stress, Connor McGovern, I don't think is starting the season healthy. I think he is going to be on the IR. I think the injury, I'm just going to take a guess given the conversation around it. Muddy waters, murky situation, not immediately healthy. So for that reason, I have Mitch Morse, Deion Dawkins, who is a good left tackle, Osiris Torrance, Ryan Bates, David Edwards, David Quessenberry, and this is where things get murky for us. I have Richard Garage making the roster. I have one of Alec Anderson or Ryan Van Denmark making it, or Nick Broker. Those are mine. Nick Broker is my ending one. So let me hear it, Greg. What are you thinking?
So I don't think you're crazy, but I do think you have 2 of them wrong. I think Ryan Van Denmark, and it's Denmark, not Denmark, not like the country.
Oh, did I say? Oh my goodness,
no,
I'm sorry.
No, everyone has done it because everyone wants to spell Denmark because you know how to spell the country Denmark. It's Denmark. There's no N in Van Denmark. I think he's decidedly a notch above Richard Garage. I like Richard Garage. I like them both. I won't be upset. Hell, you can make a case that it's worth keeping both Van Denmark and Garage over Quessenberry. They're not going to. They're going to keep David Quessenberry. But I can make a case that they're not any worse now, and they both have upside to be better. So they're not going to. They're going to keep Quessenberry. I don't think they can keep that many. And my biggest concern is also, I don't think it's 100% Connor McGovern is ready for week 1. I think that is absolutely up in the air. I also don't think that he's in a spot where they need to sit him for 4 games. So short-term IR is 4 games. There's no in between. So if you sit him, you're sitting him for all 4 games, even if he's ready week 2. So I'm not ready. I don't think it's out of the question. I don't know if we know enough now. I know we've heard enough whispers that it is enough that, hey, we're talking about a couple weeks here. It's all depending on, is that a couple weeks, meaning like, you know, from the day it happened, I think it was like 30 days, 31 days from the game. So that's 4 weeks right there. So does that mean, hey, we're not sure if he's ready week 1? If it's short-term IR, that means you're saying it's an 8-week injury, or at minimum more than 6 weeks. Because I think usually the breaking point in the decision is if we know he's going to miss 2 games and we're not even sure about the 3rd game, you might as well just do the short-term IR and get the roster spot and let him rest for all 4 and bring him back week 5. If it's not that case, and if it's debatable that, hey, we think he could be ready week 1, we just don't know, I don't think you can put him on short-term IR. So right now, my head is Connor McGovern needs to be one of the guys.
Okay.
If he's not, I do think that opens it for probably a debate of whether it's Ike Bacher or Nick Broker. I would probably lean Ike Bacher, but I think it's fair that it could be Nick Broker because he's a draft pick and there's logic to what we've seen there in the past. And then, like I said, I would have Van Denmark ahead of Garage, and I think it's going to be that set with Connor McGovern. But I will say so Connor McGovern would be the obvious guy for Reed Ferguson, where all of a sudden those guys make it. Reed Ferguson gets cut. It's because Connor McGovern needs to get put on short-term IR. Reed Ferguson comes back the next day, and it's because we kept some other lineman like Broker or Bacher. So I'm going to say that we don't do that, and that it will be the other guys you referenced, the assumed starting 5. Whether that's Connor McGovern or David Edwards at left guard is debatable. Obviously Ryan Bates, and I think it's David Quessenberry and Ryan Van Denmark.
I just prepare for the worst when I make this. If I hear about an injury where there's no, it's day to day, he's coming back tomorrow, or it's week to week, like we've had designations like that in this preseason. So when it seems kind of like I'm not hearing too much, I just assume the worst. And for that reason, it's me thinking McGovern's not there week 1, might have to be shelved for a few weeks, which justifies my take to take Rucker. Because the thing too is I think just, again, younger guy, has a lot of experience on that side of the line and was pretty damn good at it at Ole Miss. I'll take that. And that's why I wanted to add him here. But if what you said is true, if there is an outcome where McGovern is able to be on this roster, then absolutely designate him to practice squad. But this is me assuming that he's going to be on the IR.
And I don't think that's crazy. I don't think that's decided. I think, like I said, I think I'm on the other side of it, but it's not so much so that I think you're crazy. I think there is a possibility, and they do have to prepare for that possibility.
I apologize, Ryan Vandermark. Yeah, Denmark's just so much fun. It just rolls off the tongue. So that is totally on me.
I will say I see it 80-20 as Denmark. So you are by far in the majority. It's just nobody knows him. So
right.
the first time people have heard anyone talk about him is I will quick shout out to Joe Biscaglia and people who read The Athletic. He did a really nice piece on Ryan Vandermark and kind of talked through his path and his history and he's one of those guys who struggles to keep weight on and to get himself up to a NFL sized tackle playing weight. And he's talked about that and all the different things. And he talked about his struggle learning to play from the right side. Really good article and probably a guy that Bills fans need to learn a little bit more about.
Probably. So let's move on, Greg. We'll get to the defense now. So this is my defensive line prediction. Gregory Rousseau, Leonard Floyd, AJ Epineza, he stays. They don't trade him. Ed Oliver, Daquan Jones, Tim Settle, Poona Ford, Shaq Lawson, and Jordan Phillips to end it. What do you think? Von Miller on the pup, obviously.
So is that 9 or 10 without Von?
That is, I believe, 9. I count again.
9. So I'm assuming
9.
It's either a trade or a release of Boogie?
Yes.
Okay. Trade. I like your answer better. I don't think it's going to be the answer. I would prefer if your answer was the outcome. I would also like to trade Boogie Basham. It's not his fault that he's like physically not Creed Humphrey, but I'm never going to be able to undo that night. Like watching my television, I said the F word in front of my mom. I was so mad. We did so much work on Creed Humphrey, and he was such a perfect like culture fit, and like like faith first, and he had like a camo hat on in his thing, and like he was a high school wrestling champion, and like he checked every possible box of what we needed. And we had already taken a defensive end in the first round, and it was perfect. I would have taken Creed Humphrey in the first round. I'm glad we didn't. I'm glad. Of course, he would have been great too. I like Gregory Rousseau. He's awesome. I was so excited that it worked out perfect. And this guy that we did so much work on preparing and watching film, and it's great. He fell right in our laps. This is going to be perfect. And we took another defensive end who I actually liked, and if we had taken Creed Humphrey in the first round and Boogie Basham in the second round, I would have been totally fine. It's not Boogie's fault that he is not Creed Humphrey, but I'm never going to be able to undo it out of my brain. So trading him away will stop me from suffering that experience over and over again every time I see him. So I don't know what Boogie Basham is in the NFL. He's a weird tweener. He's not big enough to be an every down 3 tech, and I don't think he's fast enough to be an every down defensive end. He works on 3rd and long when you kick him inside and let him just pass rush. Like, he actually is pretty good at it. He could be part of a rotation, but we have a bunch of guys who do that. We have other guys who do that. Like, he's not a better pass rusher than Jordan Phillips or Ed Oliver. Like, he's just an extra piece we can rotate in sometimes. So right now, I have it as probably 10 defensive linemen because I think we have so much talent on the defensive line. With Von Miller going to the short-term IR, but I hope you're right, and I hope we do get back a 5th-round pick or whatever it is, get a thing, or, hey, spin, spot on, God bless it. If we can trade Boogie Basham for Kelvin Beachum, I'm already pretty insufferable on Twitter. I will be insufferable for like a 3-day period. If we trade Carlos Boogie Basham for Kelvin Beachum, I will be absolutely obnoxious of how excited I am and how many I told you so's and how many different things I'll send out of this is exactly what we should do. It would be amazing. I more, even if something like that happened, I think it would be Boogie going out for a 5th round pick and a 5th round pick going to Arizona. We don't see player for player trades very often, but if it's some combination of that, I would be so excited.
Yeah, I just am of the mindset that when you look at the line, I completely understand when people want to bring up the idea of trading Epineza, because Epineza on the last year of his deal had a pretty decent year, good year, room to grow. Feels like he might actually have some favorable numbers this year as well, that you could give him up and that you could keep Boogie and then you could get a pick back for Epineza, maybe even a higher one. But for Basham, I feel like I'm looking at how Basham's playing this preseason. I'm noticing that he is showing up, he is making plays. And I think that's kind of an opportunity to market him and kind of allow another team that might need some more pass rush depth to take him. Because I feel like losing Basham, in my eyes, is less damning than losing AJ Epineza, who I think is going to have to be your starter when Vaughn's gone and primary.
I think it'll be Leonard Floyd who starts, but it could be Epineza. But I think Epineza and Basham get talked about in the same tier too often. And they're not. AJ Epineza is better, like decidedly better than Boogie Basham. So I don't think they're on the same tier, and they get talked about as like interchangeable pieces. AJ Epineza is flat out better than Boogie Basham.
Yeah. So yeah, let's just get real quick into linebacker now. So Terrell Bernard, I do have him keeping Spector, Matt Milano, Klein, Dorian Williams, Matakevich, Dotson is out. What do you think?
Exact same answer is defensive line. I hope your answer is correct. I don't think it will be. I don't think it will. I hope you're right. I agree with like 90% of what Brandon Beane does, the way he structures his contracts, the amount that he pays people. We evaluate football players very, very similarly, which, obviously makes me happy because he's the guy in charge of my favorite team. The one I didn't understand what Terrell Dotson had done to earn more money than Taylor Rapp, more money than Damian Harris, more money than David Edwards, more money than a bunch of other really interesting players. And not only that, fully guaranteed. He got $2.1 million fully guaranteed. I don't understand. Terrell Dotson deserved to be re-signed and deserved to compete for a roster spot with a veteran minimum contract. Like, he didn't do anything to earn more money than those guys with it being fully guaranteed. So I was shocked. Now it is fully guaranteed. So we're going to pay the same amount of money whether Terrell Dotson's on this roster or not. And my only caveat is we said the same thing about OJ Howard last year. So there is precedent that it's possible. And I just have to hope that they can follow through with it and do it.
Yep. And John, just to answer this question. So I didn't make a graphic, but I will post this on Twitter and then reference it in the next show just so you have a put together list, because I know people want to see at the end, especially if Greg's giving me my peer evaluation on what it actually looks like. But yeah, I mean, I'm just hoping. I don't think Dotson's got a spot here. I think he played himself out of it, and I would rather just bank on this and maybe add if you need to add if cut down day happens and you want to modify it, or if you want to run with this unit and down the road just add there. But I feel like the loss of him isn't anything that we're going to lose sleep over. And now I'll move on to safety. Pretty cut and dry. Jordan Poyer, Micah Hyde, Taylor Rapp, DeMar Hamlin. Cam Lewis is in my cornerback room. I'll spoil that now. I'm not counting him as a safety here, but what about just those four for safety?
That would have been my question. Been my question, because I'm stuck at Andy Isabella, Balin Spector, Richard Garage, Shaq Lawson, Cam Lewis, and like out of those 5-6 names, there's like 2 spots. So there's different places where I'm not sure who makes it. I think Cam Lewis makes it. I think he's too valuable. I think he plays enough special teams roles. I don't know that I want to see him on the field, but in the same vein of it can always get worse, he's better than a street free agent coming in. So I'm torn. He's like right there in my borderline right now. So I like it that you have him on there. I'm not sold that he will be, but I think that he will as well. The other ones are a lock. I wasn't certain on Damar Hamlin coming into camp, but he's shown that he's ready to play, and God bless him. I don't know if I would be, but he is, and he looked good.
Yes, no, fully agree. Hamlin's going to be on this roster. I just needed to see him play. He's playing, bottom line. So I'll do special teams real fast. Sam Martin, Tyler Bass, Reed Ferguson.
You're
Parking lot.
idiot.
Yeah,
I can't believe you picked those three. You're
terrible. I'm the worst. But let's wrap it up with cornerback. Trey White, Dane Jackson, Taron Johnson, Christian Benford, Kyer Elam, Saran Neal, Cam Lewis.
I think that's right. I actually don't think there's a ton of mystery per se. The mystery at corner is who starts, not necessarily who makes the roster. I don't think Alex Austin has done anything that was going to force us to keep him on the roster. I know there's some debate about Saran Neal. I think that there's question long term on, do we continue to see the Saran Neals and the Tyler Matakeviches, who are pretty clearly only special teams guys and are a bit of a liability if they have to play on defense? I do think that's a fair question going forward. I don't think we see that shift here in 2023. I do think maybe we see it as more of a deciding factor going forward of who we retain, who we re-sign. But right now, Saran Neal is a very good gunner. You always see the picture of the Kansas City Chiefs famous special teams coach triple teaming Saran Neal in critical spots. Like, he is incredibly good at what he does, and then he's an okay backup nickel, which is fine. So I think it is what it is. I don't think there's a ton of mystery at the bottom of the roster, other than, does Cam Lewis make it as a 11th defensive back? And I think it's really close.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Greg, that's really the roster. I feel like it's pretty standard with a couple of moves that you could absolutely debate back and forth. Again, Von Miller not there immediately. I think you shelf him. I think McGovern's not there immediately. I think Shakir's not there immediately. Any final thoughts on the roster or really preseason before we sign off today?
No, I think that coming in, we knew that this was a very deep roster with a ton of talent and a lot of spots that there wasn't all that much mystery. And even with that, we've had some other guys play their way into the discussion. We haven't had a ton of guys play their way off. Like maybe Khalil Shakir is the only guy who was really considered a roster lock that's been questionable enough where we're not sure. Just about everyone else has solidified their roster spot, and then other guys have brought themselves on. I guess Terrell Dotson is probably in the same boat as Khalil Shakir, as guys who were assumed to be roster locks who now maybe have played their way off. We've had more guys, the Ryan Vandemarks, the Andy Isabellas, the Cam Lewises, we didn't even talk about like Cameron Klein or Eli Ankow or like some
Kingsley Jonathan.
Yeah, Kingsley Jonathan. Guys who we might get poached on those guys, but there's no real path for them to make our roster because there's just better guys ahead of them. That's great. That's a fantastic problem. That's exactly what we want to have. So I'm excited about it, and I'm curious if anybody else can change that opinion today. So I'll give a sneak preview. Tomorrow night, I will be having Victoria from Football Guys as well as Taylor Kyles on my Greg Tompsett Sports Show. We're going to be talking about, preseason wrap-ups and things like that, and I will be giving my official 53-man roster. I get to cheat over Joe. I get to watch the preseason game as well, and then be able to show it after seeing the game. But I will say I think you did a very nice job with your 53-man roster, and I would be shocked if you don't have at least 51 correct, and you might hit all 53.
Thank you so much, Greg. I appreciate you being here, guys. Again, check out the Greg Tompsett Sports Show or the Cover One podcast they do every week. Him and Aaron Quinn. He is one of the founding fathers, the Mount Rushmore of Cover One, and his work speaks for itself. I do not need to even try and gas it up because you are just one of the originators, and I really appreciate you being on the show to talk this roster with me. May these players today stay healthy, no issues. Let's just go into the regular season and be happy and healthy.
So real quick, pregame warm-ups, the tweet just came out. Terrell Bernard is dressed and warming up.
Wow.
So I'm excited. Let's go watch some football.
The boy is back. Let's go watch some football. For all of you, again, thank you so much for tuning in to this week's episode of Under Review. I'm back next week with a special episode and some special guests. You can find me at Twitter at @show_DeRosa. I really appreciate all of your time. Again, Premium Pass in the description below. You can find the link there, and Underdog Fantasy sign up in the description below as well. You were all fantastic. I appreciate everyone watching. Enjoy your Saturday. Enjoy Bills football. May everyone stay healthy. And for Greg and myself, I just have to say, go Bills. See you soon.